The proclamation of the Holy Gospel according to Mark. One of the scribes came to Jesus and asked him, "Which is the first of all the commandments?" Jesus replied, "The first is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." The scribe said to him, "Well said, teacher. You are right in saying, He is one, and there is no other than He. And to love Him with all your heart, with all your understanding, with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is worth more than all burnt offerings and sacrifices." And when Jesus saw that he answered with understanding, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And no one dared to ask him any more questions. The Gospel of the Lord.
Our Gospel reading for this Sunday comes from St. Mark. We have been reflecting on love of God, which was given to the people Israel by Moses in the first reading from Deuteronomy, as an expression of Israel's loving relationship with God, as an act of gratitude. This is not a servile response to a tyrant God, but a God who has first loved Israel. And now in return, Israel is asked to love God. But because there is only one God, then there is only one love. There is only one love. So all of you, your whole heart, your whole mind, your whole strength is to be given to God, the only God, in love. And in the second reading, we find Jesus, the high priest, giving us this wonderful example of total love of the Father. In total obedience, he really offered himself to the Father. Nothing withheld from the Father. But this love of the Father came also in the form of saving one's brothers and sisters. For that was the will of the Father, that everyone would be saved. So in Jesus, total love of the Father leads to self-giving also. Self-offering for others, for the sake of the others. Now, in the Gospel, we find Jesus, who has already lived this out, being approached by a scribe. And the scribe asked Jesus a wonderful question, an intelligent question. Which is the first? Which is the greatest of the commandments? If somebody approaches me, which is the greatest or the first of the commandments, maybe my inclination is to turn to the 10 commandments, the Decalogue, and maybe I'll engage in some mental exercise to determine which one of the 10 is the greatest. Or you might go to the whole of the Old Testament. You might even go to all of the rabbinical writings, the commentaries of the teachers of the law. And wow, it will be more confusing because they have, I think, more than 600 precepts, commandments, drawn from the commandments of God in the Old Testament. Now, if you were Jesus, how would you choose the greatest or the first among those 600 plus precepts and commandments? Now, Jesus did a choice. He went to Deuteronomy, the first reading for today, and just repeats it. You should love God, the only God, with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. That is the first. And then Jesus connects to that another precept in Deuteronomy. you should love your neighbor as yourself. The twinning of these two now comprises now the greatest of the commandments. You see, in Jesus, this commandment is not just a product of what we call probably textual comparison or textual editing, no? Using his knowledge of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures. Jesus is able to use Deuteronomy based on his experience, the experience that the second reading is talking about. He knows that it is to love God with all of you, expressed in fulfilling the will of God, that you also offer your life, the whole of your life, for your neighbor. This experience, I think, enabled Jesus to say, this is the greatest of the commandments. Not just conceptual, but experiential for Jesus. The scribe, an expert in the law, was quite pleased with the response of Jesus. And the scribe tells us something else. He says that loving God with all our heart, with all our thoughts, and with all our strength, and to love our neighbor as ourselves is worth more than any burnt offering or sacrifice. Jesus could only agree. Why? Because Jesus did not offer a sacrifice of animals or grains or fruit to be burned in the temple. What was the sacrifice of Christ, according to the second reading? It is the offering of himself. When you love, you don't only give objects, you give yourself. While it is good to give your, loved one chocolates, you give them roses, you give them, some fine things that you can buy. There is nothing that can match the gift of self. I give you my time. I share with you my talents. I share with you what I am. And hopefully in marriage, I give you my life. Unto death, you are mine. That is love. That is what Jesus did to the Father. He did not offer to the Father calves and goats and lambs. He offered himself. What did he offer for us, his brothers and sisters? Not any substitute offering, the first fruits of the earth. No, he offered his body, his blood. So Jesus knows what the greatest commandment is because he did it and because he experienced it. Now I think because he has done it, he can demand that of us. We should also love God with all of ourselves and to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. My dear brothers and sisters, we have just celebrated All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. We remembered these great men and women of faith and of love. These men and women who followed Jesus in embodying love of God through love of neighbor in a heroic manner. So let us recall their testimony. Let us learn from them how to live this commandment of love of God and neighbor. I am always touched whenever I read portions of the writings of this very famous saint, contemporary saint, Saint Therese of the Child Jesus. Oh, she died at a young age, hidden in a Carmelite monastery. But in that hiddenness, in that little way, in that being childlike, and especially in her suffering, there was only one thing that was paramount in her mind. It is to love God in everything, even in her suffering. Before she died, she even told the Mother Superior, the chalice of suffering is full, up to the brim. And she embraced it. She drank from it with full love, offering herself to the God that she loved, but always for others, for the sake of souls, for priests especially. So love of God and love of neighbor blended well in her. And now she is a doctor of the church, and she is venerated by so many people, the simple way of loving totally. The word has been exposed. Let us now fulfill it.